This is Damon Fordham, Adjunct Professor of History. And this is the second class session of History 111, dealing with world civilization. Now, before we get started, there are a few little house cleaning issues that I want to deal with. Up to that, I've been responding to some of your emails since the first class, and I want to address some of those right here and now. In regard to not being able to log in to get the book for the class, there is a customer service section over on the website for the bookstore on that link. So you can go and address it to that. And incidentally, I've already emailed the dean about the issue regarding the books. So trust me, that situation is being worked on as we speak. But even if you do not immediately get the books, I'm covering a lot of that in these filmed lectures so that you can take notes from that. And I'm giving you links that would basically suffice in the lack of having books for the time being. So even if you don't get the books yet, it's okay. I've got the material covered, so you're going to be all right. Now, additionally, in regard to the test I was telling you about, that's going to be on May the 18th. And in Thursdays, around the time we do the Thursday session, I'm going to post a study guide for that so that you'll have the whole weekend to study and go over your notes and such as we deal with these issues. So you're going to be all right. Just hang on, pay attention, and things will be great. And incidentally, too, the last day for drop ad is going to be May the 15th, so keep that in mind just in case. So also, if you look at your syllabus on the announcement section of the site, you're going to see that it also talks about your final paper. Now, when you submit things to me, folks, I'm going to tell you right now, do not use Google Drive. Send it on Microsoft Word because, see, with Google Drive, it makes it very complicated. It's hard to get into, so send these on Microsoft Word as you send them to me, okay? And we're going to deal with more instructions on that later as far as your final paper goes. But anyway, much of that is on the syllabus that's on your announcements section for right now, okay? So I hope that covers most of those. But like I said, I check these emails at least once a day so that they will be answered within a prompt manner, all right? Okay, now, we left off talking about the great civilization of Mesopotamia, the earliest known civilization to humanity. And I put extra special stress on the phrase known because, like I said, there are a lot of undiscovered civilizations there. Oh, one more thing about the books before I forget. These are going to be your main texts, as we discussed earlier. This is your main text, Worlds Together, Worlds Apart. Make sure it's Volume A with the beginnings to 600 CE, as well as your reader, which is a collection of writings. And you're going to use, and this is the material that many of you are going to base your papers on. Worlds Together, Worlds Apart, a companion reader. It's going to contain some of the writings that will be discussed in this class, and I'm going to deal with a couple of those today. Additionally, in your packet, you're going to get this, which is an additional chapter 14, which is a supplement to the main text. That's going to come within the packet whenever you get your books, okay? So now that we've covered all of those things, and if you miss any of this stuff, feel free to sort of rewind to this part, to whatever part that you're not clear of, or email me with your questions. All right? Now, with that being said, back to Mesopotamia. Now, I was speaking a little bit earlier of how these early civilizations, they had these early family structures and such. You had what was called a hierarchical society, by the way. You began to see the foundation of such things as when people would fight wars against each other, the losers would be enslaved to the winners. Now, usually when we think of slavery, we think of the type of slavery that you had here in the United States from the 1600s to the 1800s, or the slavery that's mentioned of the children of Israel in the Bible. But slavery goes back way further than that. So basically the losers in warfare would be enslaved, and the winners, of course, would be the rulers of these people. And you had a lot of that kind of thing going on in ancient Babylonia during this time period. But, and additionally, you had these villages, and I left off talking about Uruk, the oldest known city to humanity, which was around about 3000 BC or BCE, if you will. And also along this time, you begin to see the foundations of religion. Now, they did not, of course, have Christianity at this point. And Christianity, of course, would come 3,000 years later. But long before Christianity, of course, Christianity is the child of the Hebrew faith, Judaism, if you will, okay? Because, you know, Judaism is basically the foundation of many of what you see today in what is known as the Torah to the Jews and the Old Testament to the Christians, okay? So, but as a people, though, we're going to talk about them a little bit later on in our story. But for right now, I'm going to get back to Mesopotamia and what was happening over there. You began to see the first forms of worship over there, and they also began to establish some of the earliest known temples to humanity. In chapter 2 of your main text on page 52, it has an example of one of these fancy temples. And very early on, you begin to see the rise of the priesthood, the people who would be the mediators between the average person and their gods. Now, their gods were not like the God that we worship today. For one thing, these people believed in polytheism, which is the belief of more than one God. And their gods were not merciful gods like what we worship today. Many times they felt that these gods would basically be filled with terror if you disobeyed them, and they felt that natural disasters like floods and earthquakes and famines and that sort of thing was due to their disobedience to these particular gods. So they were constantly seeking these gods' favors through things such as sacrifices and offerings and the like. And their gods were also capable of bitterness and jealousy and had rivalry with each other and so forth. And the main thing that's interesting about this early religion is that the concept of morality, of being decent toward each other as human beings and all that, that was more of a secular concern than a religious concern. You're going to see that when I talk about Hammurabi a little bit later on in our discussion. Now, how do we know all of this in the first place? Well, one of the things that the people in Mesopotamia and Babylonia kind of figured out early was they are the oldest people that we know of to have the written word. And there's an interesting story as to how that came about. You see, they had a style of writing that's called cuneiform, in which they carved things into these stone tablets. And again, a little bit later on in one of these lectures in the future, I'm going to discuss how we come to be able to read this cuneiform writing. But for right now, though, they have a myth about the origins of writings on page 55 of your text. And the essence of it is this. You see, in those days when you wanted to, say one king wanted to send a message to the other, now, of course, there's no electricity, no telephones, no computers, no telegraphs or anything like that. So what they do is they would have these messengers that they would have running back and forth between these kings. Like, say the king would tell the messenger, I want you to tell King so-and-so that I said this and that, etc. and so forth. And the messenger would say, okay. So the messenger would run across hills and valleys and mountains over to the next king to deliver the message. However, Houston, we have a problem here. Let's say that in the course of that running, the messenger is running and all of a sudden he may see a beautiful young maiden on the way and he may be kind of distracted, and so therefore he might forget the message or get it garbled by the time he got to the next king. And if he did that, what would happen to that poor messenger? Well, at worst, now of course he didn't want that, right? Or say that he may have to, may have over the period of time as he's running and all that, he's thinking of other things, or they have to use the bathroom or something like that. And what are you going to do, right? So along the way, they came up with this idea that they would take a piece of clay, as described, as shown here in this picture on page 55 of your text, and they would carve little picture writing into it to symbolize certain things. And that evolved over a period of time into various forms of writing, so that they would have these people called scribes who would write down these messages, and then they'd give it to the messenger, and the messenger would take it back and forth to the king, and the message would be understood exactly as the sender understood it to be. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is supposedly how writing began. Makes perfectly good sense to me. Now, another thing about this is that in this form of early writing, which is called cuneiform, you began to see the foundation of written literature. Okay? And this early literature is extremely interesting. Now, the oldest story known to man comes from this period. It's known as the Epic of Gilgamesh. And here is a copy of it. That's my own personal copy here, the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's an early prose poem from ancient Babylon, and Gilgamesh was the king of Uruk. And the story essentially goes like this. Gilgamesh was this young, pleasure-seeking king who liked to fight and take women and drink, etc., and so forth, and enjoy all these worldly pleasures as well as battles and such, right? So along the way, he meets this wild man named Enkidu. And he and Enkidu, even though Enkidu is a wild man, you know, he's a fellow who's out in the woods and living like a savage and so forth, the two of them become very friendly. They go out, they drink together, they chase women together, and, you know, they have all these interesting adventures. But along the way, Enkidu gets involved in a battle, and he gets killed. Well, Gilgamesh, like many kings, has led somewhat of a charmed and sheltered life. So he has no experience with dealing with death, and he really can't understand how to deal with it, right? So he wonders, wait a minute, is this going to eventually happen to me someday? Well, yeah is the obvious answer, but he can't accept that yet. So he goes through this series of adventures where he tries to find the secret to eternal life. I don't mean that in the Judeo-Christian sense. I mean he wants eternal life here on this earth so that he doesn't die. All right? Well, one section that's in your book talks about this, and a portion of the epic, is on page 94 of your text, and it involves where he goes to have a drink. Yes, they made alcohol in those days pretty early on. And the lady who's serving him is called an alewife. That's A-L-E-W-I-F-E. And their conversation goes like this. Gilgamesh is complaining about how miserable he is over Enkidu's death. And he goes, the alewife spoke to him, to Gilgamesh. If you are truly Gilgamesh that struck down the guardian, destroyed Humbaba, who lived in the pine forest, killed lions in the mountain passes, seized the bull of heaven who came down from the sky and struck him down, why are your cheeks wasted, your face dejected, your heart so wretched, your appearance worn out, and grief in your innermost being? Your face is like that of the long-distance traveler. Your face is weathered by the cold and heat. Clad only in the lion skin, you roam upon open country. Gilgamesh spoke to her, to Siduri, the alewife. How could my cheeks not be wasted, my face not dejected, nor my heart wretched, nor my appearance worn out, nor grief in my innermost being, and nor my face like that of the long-distance traveler, my friend who I love so much, who experienced every hardship with me, Enkidu, who I love so much, who experienced every hardship with me. The fate of mortals have conquered him. 6 days and 7 nights I wept over him. I did not allow him to be buried until a worm fell from his nose. I was frightened. and I am afraid of death, so I roam open country. Hey, that's pretty good, huh? That's pretty deep. Well, the gist of the story is that he eventually realizes that he cannot run from death, and he realizes that this happens to everyone. And the beauty of the story is that here we are some 5,000 or so years later, and many people today, at some point in their youth, they deal with death for the first time, and they find it very difficult to handle. And they come to the unpleasant realization that, you know what, this happens to everyone sooner or later. And it's one thing to understand that on an intellectual level, but another to understand it on an emotional level. And the beautiful thing about good literature is that good literature helps you to understand the universality of the human experience, and that however personal you think your situation may be, the more universal it may be in reality. Something to think about, right? So when you read this and you identify with the kind of things that go on, it's some pretty interesting stuff. Now, also during the time period, you had this another king by the name of Hammurabi. And Hammurabi developed this series of laws that, because of this new writing system of cuneiform and all that, he had it placed in the middle of the square so that everybody would be able to read it and everyone would be able to know these laws. It's known as Hammurabi's Code. Okay? And Hammurabi's Code is kind of rough. Included in the posting today a link to some of these actual laws, and I want you to skim through that, and this can be some pretty wild stuff. So listen to this, folks. This is also in your text here on pages 90 through page 90 through 93, and just listen to some of these laws. All right. It says here that if a man and a female slave of the palace, or a male or female slave of freeman, to escape from the city gate, he shall be put to death. If a man harbor in his house a male or female slave who has fled from the palace or from a freeman, and does not bring the slave forth to the call of the commandant, the owner of the house should be put to death. If a man taketh a wife and do not arrange with her the proper contracts, the woman is not a legal wife. If the wife of the man be taken and lying with another man, adultery. They shall bind them, tie them together, and throw them into the water. If the husband of the woman would save his life, or if the king would save his male servant, he may. If a man force the betrothed wife of another, who is not known a male, that is, a virgin, and is living in her father's house, and he lie in her bosom, and they take him, that man should be put to death, and the woman should go free. If the man accuse his wife, and she has not been taken in line with another man, she shall take an oath in the name of the God, and she shall return to the house. If the finger be pointed of the wife of a man because of another man, and she had not been taken in lying, caught having sexual relations, with another man, for her husband's sake she shall throw herself into the river. Whoa. It goes on to say, get this. If a son strikes his father, they shall cut off his fingers. If a man destroy the eye of a man, they shall destroy his eye. You know, the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, that's where this comes from. If one destroy the eye of a freeman, or break the bone of a freeman, he shall pay 1 manner of silver. If one destroy the eye of another man's slave, or break the bone of a man's slave, he shall pay 1/2 his price. If a man strike his daughter and bring about a miscarriage, he shall pay 10 shekels of silver for her miscarriage. Pretty rough laws, right? Now I want you to think about this for a minute, folks. Why were such hard, rough laws necessary? There could only be one answer to that, folks. You know, it's like, say you have two children, right? You know, there's one child in the family who you just have to raise your voice too slightly, and the kid will cry, and he won't smear his peanut butter on the table, or run out of the house without clothes on, or do something really ridiculous, right? Whereas some other kids, you can discipline them all you want, but they'll still sneak out of the window at night, or skip school, or being caught smoking and drinking and things like that. Bottom line is that some people need more discipline than others. That's just reality. And whenever you see like really, really rough laws like this, 9 times out of 10, it's probably because you've got some people out there that are in really bad need of discipline. So I think that these laws the fact that these laws were necessary say a lot for the condition of the people morally in ancient Babylonia at that time. And maybe that's probably why today the term Babylon and Babylonia are synonymous with wickedness. Could be. Well, anyway, that's the end of that little tangent. But in either case, though, one of the things that I hope you've understood from this lesson today is that even though these are events that took place over 5,000 or so years ago, when you read them, you see not only how different things are from back then, but in many ways, human nature is still the same. So anyway, click onto this and the link for the rest of the Gilgamesh epic, as well as that of the laws of Hammurabi. And hope you all have a good day, and I will see you Thursday with some further things on Babylonia, and then we're going to start a little bit on ancient